last day with Josh on his 6-week rotation here. So he's going to go head back to school. Remember, he's just in his second year of PT school so far. So we're going to do just a quick Q&A, picking his brain with some of the questions that I get from you guys, people on social media, and just his feedback from being here and seeing everything behind the scenes. So coming into the rotation, what did you think of the rotation? Like, you had some preconceived ideas of what it would be like just watching stuff on social media. So what were some things that stood out, like, that were different than you thought they were going to be?
Differences in like what you see on Instagram. Obviously, Rhett does stuff different than standard PT. I didn't assume that it would be really one-on-one, which it is. There's no text, which is really cool because you're working with the same patients the entire time and with the patient the entire time, which is really nice. And then also stuff which we've kind of done videos over of doing like post-op stuff. I wasn't really sure how that was going to work with 180 system. And so it's really been cool to see that precautions are still followed, but like the protocols of you do this by week 6 are not really followed because we still respect tissue healing, but 180 is not of, stretching and doing, there's some passive range of motion, but not passive range of motion like you'd see in a standard physical therapy clinic. So that part's been nice to see at 180.
Okay. And so good example, we just had a post-op reverse total shoulder. Today was her first day out of the sling. So got out of the sling. We didn't follow any protocol with her. She's staying on where my benchmarks are. So today, first day out of the sling, walked in and she was probably like 80 degrees of flexion.
Yeah.
And 80, maybe 70, 75 degrees of abduction. But when we got done, she had 9 degrees of flexion and probably 80 degrees of abduction, which was pretty smooth, and she did well with her home exercise program. So that's the things that I'm looking for patients to hit milestones and be able to do certain things at certain weeks or days post-op versus having them follow a rigid protocol and do certain things and then change certain things. So I let them dictate what we do treatment-wise as long as they are hitting their milestones, which 99% of the time they're hitting their milestones. So let's talk about your confidence coming into this rotation. So first clinical rotation, what was your confidence level coming in dealing with just patient treatment, patient evaluation coming in versus now?
Yeah, well, to start, it was kind of first time getting hands on patients, getting to ask questions and like getting in the sense of you're not acting with your classmates anymore, which is really nice because that's sometimes hard to buy into the acting part. So probably 3 weeks in, I felt a little more comfortable getting hands on, and then now that 6 weeks in, I feel a lot more comfortable at least just talking to patients and feeling less of when I get to a certain point in conversation, brain goes blank and like, oh, what do I do next? I feel less of that and more guided in my thinking of where can we go with this patient and things like that.
So that's going to be interesting to see how much of this you can maintain and do on your other rotations.
Yeah.
So typically, and see if this kind of falls in line with what you've heard and seen from other students that have gone on rotations. Typically, when we get somebody who comes in and they've already done, they've been an aide or a tech at a PT clinic before they got into school, or maybe they've already done a short outpatient rotation and they come in. One of the comments that I get is, well, it's nice when you're not working with a diagnosis because it's easy to change what you're doing as you're going through the treatment. Whereas if you're doing diagnosis-based PT and you're following what you're supposed to do with that diagnosis, you can't really change it after you've stuck yourself in the diagnosis. And then when patients come back, they're not progressing, and it's really hard to figure out how to rewind or change what you're doing because you're already stuck in this pathway that you've had to go through, since that's the diagnosis that you're either told to treat them for by either a referring physician or maybe another PT in the clinic, or that's what you came up with when you went through their evaluation and you went through differential diagnosis and got stuck on a diagnosis.
Yeah, that part's been nice with like non-op patients. I never felt like we were following a diagnosis of a patient in the sense of this is the diagnosis, where can I go next because of that diagnosis. It was more, what is the patient showing on the table? What are they showing in their functional screen? So because of that, you can follow specifically with the patient, not the diagnosis. And I know like we're always taught in school, each patient is different, even though they may have the same diagnosis. But then when you go to the clinic and you're thinking along of how do you treat the diagnosis, so that part doesn't really mix well. So it's nice that we don't follow really diagnoses very much at all, and then looking at functional screen and what they do on the table is a lot easier to guide the treatment.
Okay. So you brought something else up there. Talk about what it's like to go from, so this morning, one of our first patients, actually the patient that we just got done with was an older individual, low back pain, hip pain, knee problems. She's in her late 60s, maybe early 70s. And before her, we had a high school cheer athlete who was obviously much younger, obviously much more athletic, obviously doing different things. She's coming in for a labral tear, so the patient that we've done the case study on. Talk about what it's like to go from a patient that are polar opposites, but you're still using the same thought processes, so you don't have to change your thinking depending on what the patient is.
Yeah, I think adapting to the patient is best. The screen, most specifically, like because of having hip and low back pain, mostly the low back pain with the older patients, you're looking at certain things on the screen of like stability wise, but then like with the labral tear patient, you're also looking at that, but then you're looking at more hip specific movements, which that's nice to kind of, because we know that there's limitations with those movements, you can assess them in the screen. So I think differentiating with that was helpful. In terms of like what should we do HEP wise, basing again what happened on the table, what they failing and passing NFT wise was easy to then say which movements do we need to do because of what was passing and failing. And so looking at specific to low back stuff and specific to labral tear, doing different stuff like that.
Yep.